Hey guys, tonight, we're not walking through grand battles or the radiant halls of Olympus. Instead, we're journeying to the quieter, darker corners of Greek mythology, to the places where the gods' favor curdled into fury. We're exploring their cruelest punishments, not the swift thunderbolt, but the slow, eternal sentence, the kind of justice that stretches into infinity, where pain becomes a silent, unchanging landscape. There's a strange sort of peace in that, a rhythm perfect for drifting away. If this kind of storytelling helps you unwind, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it truly brings you peace. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always comforting to know we're all finding quiet in the same ancient stories. So get comfortable. Let the world settle around you, dim the lights, and let's begin our descent into the chilling, quiet world of divine punishment. To understand the punishments of the Greek gods, you first have to understand the world they lived in. It wasn't a world of distant, abstract deities watching from afar. The gods were present, they were tangible, and they were deeply, frighteningly personal. They walked among mortals, they fell in love with them, and more often than not, they grew tired of them. In such a world, the line between worship and offense was whisper thin. A prayer said with the wrong tone, a boast made after a victory, a glance held for a moment too long. Any of these could be enough to draw the gaze of Olympus. And if a god noticed you, it rarely ended well. The greatest sin, the one that invited the most terrible and lasting retribution, was a single, simple concept: hubris. It's a word we still use, but to the Greeks, it was more than just arrogance or pride. Hubris was the act of a mortal forgetting their place. It was the whisper that you were more beautiful than Aphrodite, a more skilled weaver than Athena, a more prolific parent than Leto. It was the crime of believing, even for a second, that you were the equal of a god. To the Olympians, this was not just an insult. It was a tear in the fabric of the cosmos, a violation of the natural order. And order was something they valued above almost all else. So their justice was rarely about fairness. It was about making a statement. The punishments were not designed to rehabilitate, but to serve as eternal warnings, carved into the very landscape of the world. A weeping rock, a man forever chasing a rolling stone, a king trapped in an eternity of hunger. These were not just fates. They were monuments to divine authority. They were cautionary tales told, not in words, but in endless, silent suffering. The gods' anger was not always a flash of lightning. More often, it was a cold, patient, and terrifyingly creative thing. A punishment designed not just to hurt the body, but to unmake the soul by trapping it in a loop of futility. That was a true Olympian masterpiece. So, settle in now. Let the fire burn low and the shadows lengthen. We begin our journey on a mountaintop, but not the lush, vibrant peak of Olympus with its gleaming halls and feasting gods. This is a different mountain. It is remote, desolate, a place of wind and rock at the very edge of the world. There are no temples here, no whispered prayers. There is only the endless sky above and the silence of eternity below. Chained to the highest crag is a figure. He is not a man, not entirely, but one of the old order, a titan who was once a friend to the gods. He doesn't scream or struggle. His defiance is quiet, held in the set of his jaw as he stares out at the world he helped create. His crime was not pride, not in the usual sense. It wasn't lust or greed. His crime was love, a love for the fleeting, fragile creatures of the earth humanity. He saw them shivering in the dark, and in an act of cosmic treason, he gave them a gift they were never meant to have, a gift that warmed them, gave them light, and allowed them to build civilizations. But in doing so, he stole it from the gods. Let us begin with him, the champion of mankind, the fire-bringer, the eternal sacrifice. Let us begin with the story of Prometheus. Prometheus was not like the others. He was born of the old world, a son of the Titan Iapetus, but his vision was fixed on the new one. When the great war between the Olympians and the Titans, the Titanomachy, shook the cosmos, Prometheus and his brother Epimetheus chose a side. They did not fight with their kin, they stood with Zeus. It was Prometheus's cleverness, his foresight, that helped tip the scales in favor of the younger gods. He was an ally, an architect of the new order, a friend to the king of Olympus. After the war, he was given a task befitting his creative spirit to fashion the creatures of the earth. And so, from humble clay and water, Prometheus shaped mankind. He breathed life into them. But he did more than that. He grew to love them. He watched his creations wander the earth, fragile and lost. They were naked to the elements, huddled in caves, without tools or understanding, living in a perpetual state of darkness and fear. They were, in his eyes, incomplete. The gods, meanwhile, had everything. They had warmth, knowledge, and the brilliant, sacred fire that was the source of all craft and progress. They kept this power for themselves, a divine privilege that separated them from the mortals below. To Zeus, this was the correct order of things. The gap between gods and men was meant to be vast and unbridgeable. But Prometheus, whose name means forethought, saw a future for humanity that was more than just bare survival. He saw cities, art, and civilization, and he knew they could never achieve it without a spark of the divine. So he made a choice. In an act of quiet rebellion, he ascended to the heavens. Some say he went to the hearth of Olympus itself, others that he crept into the fiery workshop of Hephaestus, the divine blacksmith. There, he lit a torch from the sacred flame, concealed the embers in the hollow stalk of a fennel plant, and brought it down to earth. He taught mankind how to use it, how to forge tools, to cook food, to warm their homes, and to gather at night, sharing stories under the light. For the first time, mortals had power. They had a piece of the magic that had once belonged only to the gods. It was an act of profound compassion, a gift of liberation. But to Zeus, it was the ultimate betrayal. The king of the gods was not merely angered, he was personally offended. This was not a simple theft. It was a challenge to his authority, a disruption of his carefully constructed world order. Fire was the symbol of divine supremacy, and Prometheus had handed it to creatures who were meant to remain ignorant and dependent. Zeus's punishment, therefore, could not be swift. Death was too easy for a crime this monumental. The retribution had to be eternal, a lesson carved into the flesh of an immortal, a spectacle of suffering for all to see. He summoned Hephaestus, the god of the forge, the very god from whom the fire may have been stolen. Hephaestus, ever loyal, ever dutiful, was given a heartbreaking task to forge chains of unbreakable adamantine and bind his friend, the Titan Prometheus, to the highest peak of the Caucasus Mountains. The journey was long and silent. They led Prometheus to the desolate, windswept rock face at the edge of the world. There, with heavy heart, Hephaestus obeyed. He hammered the chains into the stone, binding Prometheus's limbs, ensuring there was no escape. The cold metal bit into his skin, a permanent fixture against the unyielding rock. And there Zeus left him, pinned between the earth he loved and the heavens he had betrayed. But the chains were only the beginning. The true punishment arrived with the dawn. Each morning, a great eagle, the personal emblem of Zeus, would descend from the sky. It was a magnificent, terrifying creature, its shadow falling over the helpless Titan. It would land upon his chest, its talons digging into his flesh, and with its sharp beak, it would begin its work. It would tear open his abdomen and feast upon his liver, devouring it piece by piece. The pain was an agony beyond mortal comprehension, a fresh violation every single day, and because Prometheus was immortal, he could not die. He could only endure. When the eagle was satisfied, it would fly away, leaving him broken and bleeding under the sun. Then, as night fell, a cruel miracle would occur. His immortal body would heal itself. The wound would close, and his liver would regenerate completely, making itself whole again, ready for the eagle's return at the next sunrise. This was the genius of Zeus's cruelty, a perfectly closed loop of torture. There was no end, no hope of release, no numbness to the pain. Every day, the agony was as fresh and sharp as the first. He was trapped in a cycle of destruction and renewal. His own immortality turned into the engine of his suffering. He hung there for ages, silent. He spoke to the winds, the streams, and the vast, empty sky, lamenting his fate but never regretting his choice. He had given humanity knowledge, and he would bear the cost. His suffering became a legend, a symbol of the price of rebellion against absolute power. He was the quiet martyr, the lonely figure whose defiance was not in fighting back, but in enduring. He withstood the pain, the isolation, and the daily torment, his spirit unbroken. He was a reminder that even when the body is chained, the will can remain free. And so he waited, watching the millennia crawl by, his gaze fixed on the distant world he had forever changed, all for the love of a flickering flame. Our next story does not begin on a battlefield or in a king's court. It begins in a small, dusty village, in the humble home of a dyer. And our subject is not a hero or a queen, but his daughter, a young woman named Arachne. She had no divine blood, no royal title. All she had was a gift of the hands. Arachne was a weaver, and her skill was not just remarkable, it was supernatural. To watch her work was to watch magic unfold in slow motion. Her fingers didn't seem to move. They danced, they blurred. They flew across the loom, pulling threads of wool and linen into scenes so vivid they seemed to breathe. She could weave the foam of the sea so that you could almost smell the salt. She could weave the blush on a maiden's cheek so that you could feel its warmth. Nymphs of the forest would leave their groves, and nymphs of the rivers would leave their streams, just to stand in quiet awe and watch her work. The threads seemed alive in her hands, not just obeying her will, but anticipating it. Her tapestries were not mere cloth. They were worlds, captured in silk and dye. And as her fame grew, so did her pride. When people praised her, whispering that surely she must have been taught by the great goddess Athena herself, the patron of wisdom and craft, Arachne would scoff. Taught by Athena, she would say, her voice sharp with confidence. Athena could learn from me. My skill is my own. It was a dangerous thing to say. It was one thing to be proud of your work. It was another to deny its divine spark. But Arachne went further. In the town square, surrounded by admirers, she made her fatal boast, "Let Athena come and challenge me. If I lose, I will accept any punishment she deems fit." Word of this challenge, as all words do, reached Olympus. Athena was not a goddess known for her temper, not in the fiery way of Zeus or the stormy moods of Poseidon. Her anger was a colder, more deliberate thing, like the slow creep of frost. She was the goddess of reason, of strategy, and of the very craft Arachne claimed to have mastered. This was not just an insult to her pride, it was an insult to the order of the world. Still, she decided to offer the girl a chance. She descended to Arachne's village, disguised as a stooped, gray-haired old woman. She leaned on a wooden staff and approached the young weaver. "My child," she said, her voice frail, "seek all the fame you wish among mortals, but do not compete with the gods. Be wise. Ask for the goddess's forgiveness for your reckless words, and she, in her mercy, will grant it." Arachne looked up from her loom, her eyes flashing. She saw not a goddess in disguise, but a meddling old woman. "Save your advice for your own daughters," she snapped. "I need no counsel. I have said what I have said. If the goddess is so great, why doesn't she come here and prove it herself?" As she spoke the words, the old woman began to change. The stooped back straightened. The gray hair turned to gold. The frail form grew tall and majestic, radiating a divine light. Athena stood, revealed, a helm on her head and a spear in her hand, her gray eyes narrowed and serious. The crowd gasped and fell to their knees, all except Arachne. She had blushed for a moment, but her pride was stronger than her fear. The challenge had been made, and now it was accepted. 2 looms were set up. Without another word, they began to weave. The room was silent except for the rhythmic clatter of the shuttles and the soft whir of the threads. Athena's tapestry was a masterpiece of divine propaganda. In the center, she wove the scene of her majestic contest with Poseidon over the city of Athens. She showed herself, gifting the city the olive tree, a symbol of peace and prosperity, while Poseidon offered a useless saltwater spring. In the 4 corners of the tapestry, she added smaller scenes, subtle warnings to any mortal who might watch images of other humans who had dared to challenge the gods and had been transformed into mountains or birds for their hubris. Her work was a perfect, orderly, and beautiful threat. It was a testament to the power and unchallengeable authority of Olympus. Beside her, Arachne's loom told a different story. Her skill was, impossibly, just as perfect. The technique was flawless, the colors more vibrant, the figures more alive. But it was the subject matter that was her final act of defiance. Her tapestry was a stunning, unflinching catalog of the gods' embarrassments and sins. She wove Zeus in all his various disguises, seducing mortal women. There he was as a bull carrying off Europa, as a swan with Leda, as a shower of gold for Danae. She showed Poseidon, Apollo, Dionysus, all of them, in their moments of moral failure, their forms shifting, their promises broken. Her tapestry wasn't just a work of art. It was an accusation. It was the truth, woven with such beauty that it was impossible to deny it. It declared that the gods, for all their power, were flawed, hypocritical, and far from perfect. When they finished, Athena stepped over to inspect Arachne's work. She searched for a single flawed thread, a single technical error she could point to. She found none. The work was perfect, and that, more than anything, broke her divine composure. The truth of the scenes, the sheer audacity of the mortal girl who dared to display it so beautifully, it was too much. In a sudden flash of rage, Athena ripped Arachne's magnificent tapestry to shreds. She tore the threads that depicted her father's scandals, reducing the masterpiece to rags. Then she took her shuttle, made of hard boxwood, and struck Arachne on the forehead, again and again. The finality of it broke the young weaver. Her pride shattered, her life's work destroyed, her very being humiliated by the goddess she had challenged. She could not bear it. Arachne fled, and in her despair, she tied a noose and tried to hang herself from a beam. But Athena was not finished with her. A cruel, cold pity stirred in the goddess. Death was too quick an escape. Live, Athena whispered, her voice devoid of warmth. But live on, and hang, and weave forever. She sprinkled Arachne with the juices of a poison herb. As the liquid touched her body began to shrink. Her hair fell out, her nose and ears withered away, and her fingers fused to her sides, becoming long, spindly legs. Her head grew smaller, and her belly swelled. She had been transformed into the world's first spider. Her skill remained, but it was no longer a conscious art. It was a blind, compulsive instinct. Athena had given her life, but cursed her to spend it hanging from a thread, endlessly weaving webs in dark corners, a permanent monument to the danger of speaking truth to power. In the sun-dappled forest and winding valleys of Phrygia, there lived a creature who was neither god nor man. His name was Marsyas, and he was a satyr. Part goat, part human, he belonged to the wild, untamed world. He was a spirit of the trees and the streams, a creature of instinct and music, a follower of the great god Dionysus. He spent his days wandering through shaded groves, his ears attuned to the whispers of the wind and the rhythm of the earth. He was simple, he was joyful, and he was, for a time, content. His fate changed the day he was walking by a river and found something gleaming in the reeds. It was a flute carved from bone, but it was no ordinary instrument. This was the aulos, an invention of the goddess Athena herself. She had crafted it, put it to her lips, and played a melody of divine beauty. But when she caught her reflection in the water, she saw that playing the flute puffed out her cheeks and distorted her perfect, serene features. In a moment of divine vanity, she cursed the instrument and threw it aside, declaring that whoever picked it up would meet a terrible end. Marsyas knew nothing of this curse. He saw only a beautiful object, and when he lifted it to his lips, the instrument seemed to sing for him. He was a natural. He poured all the wildness of his spirit into the flute. His music was not the clean, structured harmony of the Olympian halls. It was the sound of the world that mortals rarely heard. It was the rushing of water over stones, the cry of a hawk on the wind, the rustling of leaves in an ancient forest, the deep, mournful sound of the earth itself. His music was raw, passionate, and deeply emotional. Animals would gather to listen, shepherds would leave their flocks, and the nymphs of the woods would weep at the sheer, untamed beauty of the sound. And like Arachne before him, this incredible gift began to nurture a dangerous seed of pride. He was no longer just Marsyas, the satyr. He was Marsyas, the greatest musician in the world. He truly believed it. In his mind, the passion and soul of his music were superior to any instrument, any player. And so, in a moment of ultimate hubris, he did the unthinkable. He sent out a challenge to the god of music himself, Apollo, the golden-haired, radiant god of the lyre, of poetry, of prophecy, and of a perfectly ordered, celestial harmony that was said to hold the cosmos in balance. Apollo, who never took a challenge lightly, accepted. He was the god of music. The very notion that a wild creature from the forest could rival him was an offense that had to be answered. They agreed to a contest, and the Muses, the 9 goddesses of the arts, were invited to be the judges. The stage was set in a quiet meadow. All of nature seemed to hold its breath. Marsyas went first. He put the aloes to his lips and began to play. The melody that poured out was heartbreakingly beautiful. It told the story of the forest, of birth and death, of joy and sorrow. It was a sound so full of life and raw feeling that the entire landscape seemed to lean in to listen. The trees swayed in rhythm, the animals lay down in silent reverence, and even the Muses were visibly moved, their eternal composure softening with tears. For a moment, it seemed that the satyr might actually win. The raw, emotional power of his art was undeniable. Then it was Apollo's turn. He stood, calm and radiant, holding his golden lyre. He did not play with the wild passion of Marsyas. His music was different. It was the sound of perfection. It was the harmony of the spheres, the mathematical beauty of the stars wheeling in the night sky. Each note was precise, clear, and resonant with divine authority. It was less a song and more a statement of cosmic order. The sheer, overwhelming brilliance of his playing brought the Muses back to their senses. The contest was close, a near-perfect tie between the music of the earth and the music of the heavens. But Apollo had not become the god of music through fairness alone. He was, as the myths often remind us, dramatic and a poor loser. Knowing the contest was too close to call, he introduced a new rule. He turned to Marsyas and said, "To truly prove our skill, let us now play our instruments upside down and sing as we play." It was a clever, cruel trick. For Apollo, with his lyre, it was easy. He could turn it over and sing, his voice adding another layer to the melody. But for Marsyas and his flute, it was impossible. He could not play it upside down, and he certainly couldn't sing while his lips were on the instrument. Marsyas was defeated, not by a lack of talent, but by a trick. The Muses, swayed by the divine authority and cleverness of the god, had no choice but to declare Apollo the winner. Marsyas stood, silent and ashamed, his flute hanging uselessly in his hand. He had lost, and now he had to face the punishment he had agreed to. Apollo's smile was gone. His face, usually so bright and serene, became cold and hard. He was the god of healing, of light, of poetry, but he was also the god of plagues and righteous fury. And the punishment he devised for the satyr who dared to challenge him was one of the most horrific acts ever committed by an Olympian. He seized Marsyas and dragged him to a tall pine tree. He strung him up by his hands, and then, with a small, sharp knife, Apollo, the god of beauty, began to flay the satyr alive. He peeled the skin from Marsyas's body, slowly and methodically, until the creature was nothing but a mass of raw, bleeding muscle. The myths say the satyr's screams echoed through the valley, and all of nature wept for him. The nymphs, the other satyrs, the animals, even the earth itself cried tears of sorrow. His blood flowed down the tree and into the soil, pooling to form a new stream. The waters of that stream were the clearest in all of Phrygia, and the Greeks would say that the river, which they named Marsyas in his honor, was formed from the tears of a world mourning its lost musician. The god had proven his point. His order was absolute, but he had silenced a beautiful song forever, and in its place left only the memory of a scream and the sound of a weeping river. From the lonely crags of the Caucasus and the dark corners of the forest, our story now travels to the heart of a great city. We arrive in Thebes, a place of wealth, power, and high walls. And here we meet its queen, Niobe. She was a woman who had everything. She was the daughter of Tantalus, he who suffered eternal hunger and thirst, but she had escaped her father's cursed legacy. She was married to a king, Amphion, who loved her dearly. She lived in a palace of stunning beauty, and she was admired by her people. But her greatest treasure, the source of her deepest pride, was her children. She had 14 of them. 7 sons, strong, handsome, and skilled in all the athletic arts of Greece, and 7 daughters, each more beautiful than the last, their laughter like music in the palace halls. Niobe didn't just love her children, she saw them as a reflection of her own greatness. They were proof of her fortune, her vitality, her superiority. Every day she would watch them, her heart swelling with a pride that was slowly, dangerously, beginning to curdle into arrogance. One day, a festival was declared in Thebes. The women of the city were gathering to burn incense and lay wreaths of flowers at the altars of Leto, the gentle Titaness who was the mother of 2 of the most powerful Olympians, the radiant god Apollo and the fierce goddess Artemis. As the women prayed, their heads bowed in reverence, Niobe appeared. She was dressed in magnificent robes, her head held high, her expression one of disdain. She strode through the crowd, her presence silencing the prayers. "How foolish you are," she announced, her voice ringing with authority. "Why do you worship Leto, a goddess you have never even seen? Why honor her, who has only 2 children? When I stand before you, look at me." She gestured to herself, a living embodiment of fertility and fortune. "I have 7 times as many children as she does. 14 beautiful children, compared to her meager 2. Surely my claim to divinity is greater. My happiness is secure. Who can deny it? Even if 1 or 2 of my children were taken from me, I would still be richer than she. Stop this foolishness. Leave her altars. The temple that should be built is mine." It was an act of staggering hubris. She had not only insulted a goddess, she had tried to steal her worshippers, to erase her from the city's heart. On Olympus, Leto heard the queen's proud words. She was deeply wounded. She turned to her 2 children, her divine offspring, her face a mask of quiet fury. "My children," she said, "a mortal queen has mocked me. She has declared herself my superior and questions your own glory. She must be taught that the power of a Titaness cannot be measured by numbers. Apollo and Artemis needed no further encouragement. Their mother's honor had been challenged, and their response would be swift, silent, and absolute. They descended from the heavens, cloaked in shadow, their silver bows in their hands. Down in Thebes, Niobe's 7 sons were practicing their sports in a field outside the city walls. They were riding horses, throwing javelins, their bodies glistening with youth and strength. Suddenly the eldest son cried out. An invisible arrow had pierced him, and he fell from his horse, dead before he hit the ground. One by one, Apollo, the god of light, shot them down from his unseen perch. He was a perfect archer. His arrows never missed. As one brother tried to help another, he too was struck down. The field became a silent stage of death, until all 7 sons lay still upon the grass. Word reached the palace. Niobe, her pride now turning to horror, rushed to the field. She saw her beautiful sons, lifeless. Her husband, King Amphion, upon seeing the sight, drew his own sword and killed himself in despair. But Niobe's grief was mixed with a defiant rage. She knelt among the bodies of her sons, and looking to the sky, she cried out, "You have punished me, cruel Leto, but even in my grief, I am still greater than you. You have taken my sons, but I still have my 7 daughters." It was her final mistake. As she spoke, the figure of Artemis appeared, her face as cold and beautiful as the moon. And one by one, the goddess of the hunt began to kill the daughters. They fell in the palace, in the courtyards, their laughter silenced forever. The last daughter tried to hide in Niobe's arms, and the queen shielded her, screaming at the heavens, "Leave me this one, just one." But the arrow had already flown. The last child fell dead in her mother's embrace. Now she was truly alone. 14 children, gone in a single afternoon. She sat there among the bodies, motionless. The grief that overcame her was no longer a human emotion. It was something elemental, a sorrow so vast and so absolute that it stopped her heart, but not her tears. She wept and wept, unable to move, unable to speak, her body growing cold and rigid. The gods, watching from above, saw that her suffering had become her entire being. And so, in a final, chilling act that was part mercy and part punishment, they transformed her. Her flesh hardened into stone. Her limbs fused into a rocky form. She became a statue of pure, petrified grief. A great whirlwind then lifted the stone figure from the palace of Thebes and carried it back to her homeland, to Mount Sisyphus in Anatolia. And there, on the side of the mountain, they left her. She stands there, even now, a rock formation that resembles a weeping woman. And from the porous limestone of her face, a trickle of water continuously seeps out, glistening like tears in the sun. She had been made into an eternal monument of her own sorrow, her tears flowing for all time. A silent warning to any mortal who would dare to count themselves greater than the gods. The stories we have heard so far were born of defiance spoken aloud. A boast in a town square, a challenge issued in a sunlit meadow, a proud queen's public decree. These were crimes of the stage, acts of hubris performed before an audience of mortals and gods. The punishments, in turn, were public spectacles: a body chained to a mountain, a spider in a dusty corner, a weeping stone on a cliffside. They were warnings meant to be seen and understood by all. But now, let us drift deeper, away from the open declarations and into the shadowed halls of palaces, into the secret chambers of the heart. For not all crimes against the gods are shouted from the rooftops. Some are whispered at the banquet table. Some are born from a cleverness that seeks to cheat fate, to deceive death itself. These are the sins of violation, not of competition. They are the breaking of sacred trusts, the defiling of hospitality, and the quiet belief that a mortal can outwit the cosmic order. Here, the punishments become more personal, more psychological. They are not always a physical transformation, but a twisting of the very essence of being. They are the curses of the mind, designed to lock the soul into a state of perpetual, agonizing desire, or to condemn it to an eternity of meaningless labor. So let the world outside grow quiet. We now turn from the challengers to the schemers, beginning with a king who was invited to dine with the gods and committed a crime so monstrous. His name would become a word for temptation without relief forevermore. There are mortals who are loved by the gods, and then there was Tantalus. He was more than a king, more than a wealthy ruler. By some accounts, he was the son of Zeus himself, a man who walked a shimmering line between the mortal world and the divine. He was granted a privilege that no other human had ever known. He was invited to Olympus to dine at the gods' own table. Imagine it. He sat on golden chairs, breathed the perfumed air of the heavens, and tasted the food of immortality, ambrosia, and nectar. He listened to the private conversations of the Olympians, their gossip, their arguments, their plans for the world. He was treated not as a subject, but as a peer. The gods trusted him. They welcomed him into their inner circle, a mortal breathing the air of divinity. But this closeness did not fill Tantalus with awe or gratitude. It filled him with a terrible arrogance. He began to see the gods not as all-powerful beings to be revered, but as companions to be tested. Their secrets, which he was privy to, he would sometimes leak to his mortal friends back on earth. He even stole some of the ambrosia and nectar to share with them, a petty theft that was also a profound sacrilege. The gods were patient. They overlooked these small betrayals. But Tantalus, his ego swelling with each visit to Olympus, decided to devise one final, monstrous test of their divinity. He wanted to know, once and for all, if they were truly all-knowing. He invited the Olympians to a great banquet at his own palace in Sisyphus. The gods, honoring their friendship, accepted. They arrived to a feast of incredible splendor. But one dish, served in a grand cauldron, was prepared with a secret ingredient. In the days leading up to the banquet, Tantalus had taken his own young son, Pelops, killed him, and had the boy's flesh chopped and boiled into a stew. He set this horrific meal before the gods, his heart beating with a clinical curiosity. Would they know? Would they be able to distinguish the flesh of his son from that of an animal? They knew instantly. The moment the dish was uncovered, a wave of horror washed over the divine guests. They could see the unspeakable nature of the meal. They looked at Tantalus, their host, with utter revulsion. He had broken every sacred law imaginable, the bond between father and child, the trust between host and guest, and the fundamental respect owed to the gods. All of them recoiled from the table, refusing to touch the food, all but one. The goddess Demeter, her mind clouded with a grief that was almost as vast as the sky itself, was not paying attention. Her own daughter, Persephone, had recently been abducted by Hades and taken to the underworld. Consumed by her sorrow, she did not notice the true nature of the meal before her, and so, absent-mindedly, she picked up a piece from the cauldron and ate the boy's left shoulder. The other gods sprang into action. This abomination could not be allowed to stand. They gathered the pieces of the boy from the stew and placed them back into the cauldron. The fates were called upon to respin the thread of his life, and the goddess Rhea breathed new life into his form. Pelops was reborn, whole and perfect. The only part missing was his shoulder, the piece Demeter had eaten. So Hephaestus, the master craftsman, forged him a new one from gleaming, pure ivory. Pelops would live on, forever marked by his father's crime, his ivory shoulder a beautiful, tragic reminder. But for Tantalus, there would be no rebirth, no forgiveness. His crime was a stain upon the cosmos itself. Zeus, his own father, looked down upon him, his face not with the fury of a lightning storm, but with a cold, deep, and eternal disappointment. The punishment for a man who had perverted the act of feasting had to be a masterpiece of poetic justice. Zeus cast Tantalus down, not just from his throne, but from the world of light itself, into the deepest, darkest pit of the underworld Tartarus. And there his torment began. He was made to stand in a pool of cool, clear water. It reached right up to his chin, so close he could feel its moisture on his lips. He was burning with a thirst so powerful it felt as if his throat were filled with dust. But every time he bent his head to take a sip, the water would drain away, vanishing into the scorched earth beneath his feet, leaving him standing in dry mud, the cool relief just a memory. Above his head, the branches of a magnificent fruit tree hung low, heavy with the most tempting fruit imaginable. Ripe pears, sweet figs, glistening pomegranates, and crisp apples dangled just inches from his face. He was tormented by a hunger that gnawed at his very soul. He would reach up a trembling hand to pluck a single piece of fruit, a single moment of relief. But just as his fingers were about to close around it, a sudden gust of wind sent from the world above would sweep through Tartarus and whip the branches just out of his reach. This was his eternity, to be forever surrounded by the very things he craved most. To have water to quench his thirst and food to ease his hunger always visible, always present, always within his grasp, but never, ever attainable. His punishment was not deprivation. It was the torture of the near miss. It was the endless cycle of hope and disappointment, repeated for all time. He who had served a forbidden feast would now be forever denied one, and his name would echo through mortal language for all time, as the root of the word tantalize, a permanent reminder of the eternal agony of a desire that can never be fulfilled. In the city of Ephyra, which would one day be known as Corinth, there ruled a king named Sisyphus. He was known throughout Greece not for his piety or his strength, but for his mind. Sisyphus was the cleverest of all mortals, a master of trickery and deceit. His intellect was a glittering, intricate web, and he took immense pride in his ability to outwit his rivals, his enemies, and, he believed, even the gods themselves. He saw life as a game of strategy, and he was convinced he was the best player. This belief would be his undoing, His first major transgression was against the king of the gods himself, Zeus. In one of his many amorous pursuits, had transformed into a great eagle and abducted a beautiful river nymph named Aegina. Her father, the river god Aesopus, was frantic. He searched the lands for his daughter, asking everyone he met if they had seen her. Sisyphus had. He had witnessed the abduction from his citadel. When Aesopus came to him, the cunning king saw an opportunity. He agreed to tell the river god what had happened, but for a price. He demanded that Aesopus create a permanent, life-giving spring for the city of Corinth. The desperate father agreed, and Sisyphus revealed Zeus's secret. To Sisyphus, it was just good business. But to Zeus, it was an unforgivable betrayal. A mortal had used divine gossip as a bargaining chip. For this, Zeus ordered Thanatos, the quiet, winged personification of death, to go to Corinth and escort Sisyphus to the underworld. But when death arrived, Sisyphus greeted him not with fear, but with a friendly curiosity. He complimented Thanatos on his magnificent chains, meant for shackling the souls of the dead. "How do they work, exactly?" Sisyphus asked innocently. As Thanatos demonstrated how the shackles fastened, Sisyphus sprang his trap, locking Death himself in his own chains. He then kept Thanatos prisoner in his palace. With Death incapacitated, a strange and terrible stillness fell over the world. No one could die. Mortals on their deathbeds lingered in agony. The old and suffering could find no release. And on the battlefields, the god of war, Ares, grew furious. His glorious, brutal conflicts had become meaningless. Men were wounded, but none would fall. The natural order of life and death had been broken. Enraged, Ares stormed the palace of Sisyphus, freed Thanatos from his chains, and handed the cowering king over to him. Sisyphus's time was up. But even as he was being led to the underworld, the trickster king had one more scheme. He spoke quietly to his wife, Merope. "When I am gone," he whispered, "do not perform the proper funeral rites. Do not place a coin in my mouth for the ferryman. Leave my body unburied and unmourned." His wife, loyal and trusting, obeyed. Upon arriving in the gray, sunless realm of Hades, Sisyphus put on a show of great indignation. He went before Persephone, the queen of the underworld, and lamented his fate. "My queen," he cried, "a terrible injustice has been done. My wicked wife has left my body to rot in the sun, refusing me the proper honors. She has shown no respect for the dead. Please allow me to return to the world above for just a few days, so I may punish her for this impiety and arrange for a proper burial. I swear I will return once it is done." Persephone, who valued the sacred rights of the dead, was moved by his plea and granted his request. Sisyphus, laughing to himself, returned to the world of light. And, of course, he had no intention of ever going back. He rejoined his wife, embraced his life, and continued to reign in Corinth, mocking the gods he had so cleverly deceived. He lived on for many more years, growing old and frail, convinced he had won. But the gods do not forget. Eventually, Zeus had enough. He sent Hermes, the swift messenger who never failed, to forcibly drag the old king's soul back to the underworld for his final judgment. Sisyphus had twice cheated death and had betrayed the king of the gods. His crimes were not of passion, but of a calculated arrogance that sought to unravel the very laws of existence. His punishment, therefore, had to be a reflection of his life. It had to be a monument to futility. In the depths of Tartarus, Sisyphus was brought before a steep, barren hill. At its base rested an immense boulder, larger than any man could hope to move. His sentence was this: he was to push the boulder up the hill. He set his shoulders to the cold stone and began. The work was agonizing. The rock was heavy, its surface rough against his skin. His muscles screamed, his back ached, and sweat poured from his brow, mixing with the dust of the underworld. For days, weeks, years, he strained against the immense weight, pushing it inch by inch up the steep incline, and after an eternity of effort, he would approach the summit. He could feel the crest of the hill just beneath the stone. For a single, fleeting moment, a flicker of hope, of triumph, would enter his heart. He was about to succeed. But in that very instant, just as the boulder was about to settle at the top, it would slip from his grasp. A divine curse would pull it back, and the great rock would roll, slowly at first, then faster and faster, all the way back down the hill, coming to a rest in the exact spot where he had begun. Sisyphus would watch it go, his body trembling with exhaustion. And then he would wipe the sweat from his eyes, set his jaw, and walk back down the hill to start again. This was his eternity, not just the physical torment of the labor, but the psychological torture of its complete and utter meaninglessness. The cycle was perfect. The hope, the effort, the near success, and the inevitable failure, repeated forever. A man who spent his life on clever schemes that ultimately amounted to nothing was now condemned to a task that literally accomplished nothing. And unlike the other shades in Tartarus, he was fully aware of his condition, his sharp mind now a tool for contemplating his own endless, pointless struggle. He was left alone with the hill, the stone, and the crushing weight of an effort that would never, ever be finished. Our next story begins not with a challenge to the gods, but with a crime committed by one mortal against another. We journey to Thessaly, to the kingdom of the Lapiths, ruled by a man named Ixion. His story is stained from the very beginning, for he was the first man in all of Greek history to commit the terrible sin of kinslaying. He had promised a handsome bride price to his father-in-law, Deianeus, for the hand of his wife, Dia. But once married, Ixion refused to pay. The debt lingered, a shadow on his honor. Deianeus, in retaliation, stole some of Ixion's prized horses. Ixion, instead of settling the matter with honor, devised a plan of gruesome revenge. He concealed his rage behind a mask of friendship and invited his father-in-law to a great feast at his palace. But this was no feast of reconciliation. Ixion had ordered a deep pit to be dug in front of the palace gates, and had it filled with burning wood and charcoal. He covered the pit with a thin layer of earth, making it look like solid ground. When Deianeus arrived, unsuspecting, he walked straight into the trap and fell into the fiery pit, where he was burned alive. It was a monstrous crime, a murder born of greed and sealed with the ultimate betrayal of hospitality. The act was so abhorrent, so polluting, that no one on earth would purify Ixion. The neighboring kings cast him out. The priests refused him access to the temples. He became an exile, a man tainted by the blood of his own family, forever haunted by his sin, but for reasons that remain a mystery of the divine heart. Zeus, from his throne on Olympus, took pity on the outcast king. Perhaps he saw in Ixion's passionate, violent nature a distant echo of himself, or perhaps he simply chose this moment to display the depth of his capacity for mercy. He brought the disgraced king to Olympus, personally performed the sacred rituals that cleansed him of his blood guilt, and like he did for Tantalus, invited him to join the feasts of the gods. Ixion was given a second chance, a redemption of the highest possible order. He was saved from a life of shame and isolation and brought into the radiant heart of the cosmos. One would think a man granted such extraordinary grace would spend the rest of his days in humble gratitude. But Ixion's soul was as flawed as it was passionate. Surrounded by the power and beauty of Olympus, he was not humbled, he was emboldened. And his gaze fell upon the one figure who should have been beyond the reach of any mortal's desire, Hera, the queen of the gods, the wife of his own savior and host. To lust after the wife of the man who had purified you was the greatest possible violation of Xenia, the sacred bond between guest and host. Hera, ever dignified, may have complained of his insolent staring to her husband, or perhaps Zeus, the all-seeing, noticed it himself. He saw the way Ixion looked at his queen, and he decided to put the mortal's gratitude to the test. He could not believe a man he had shown such compassion to could be so treacherous. So, he fashioned a phantom from the clouds, a perfect, ethereal replica of Hera. Her name was Nephili, and she was a being of mist and light, shaped by the will of a god. Zeus sent the cloud Hera to Ixion. The foolish king, his mind clouded by arrogance and desire, saw only the object of his obsession. He did not question why the queen of the gods would suddenly welcome his advances. He saw only what he wanted to see. He embraced the cloud phantom and, in his lust, made love to her. From this strange and sacrilegious union, a new race of creatures was said to have been born, the centaurs, half man and half horse, forever embodying the clash between civilized reason and bestial instinct. Zeus now had his proof. Ixion had not only harbored a forbidden desire, he had acted upon it. The king's mercy vanished, instantly replaced by a terrible and righteous rage. Ixion was cast from Olympus, his brief stay in the heavens ending in a fall from grace more profound than his first. Zeus struck him with a thunderbolt, searing his flesh and soul. But death was not his sentence. For a man who had betrayed hospitality and repaid mercy with lust, the punishment had to be as dizzying and relentless as his own unbridled passions. Zeus ordered Hermes to take him to Tartarus. There he was bound hand and foot to a great wheel. But this was no ordinary wheel. It was winged. It was on fire, and it was cursed to revolve for all eternity. Hermes tied him to the flaming spokes, and the wheel was set in motion. It spun and spun, a vortex of fire and agony, carrying the screaming king through the dark, empty spaces of the underworld. There was no rest, no pause, no moment of stillness. His torment was one of perpetual, nauseating motion. He who had been lifted up to the heights of Olympus was now condemned to trace an endless fiery circle in the depths of hell. His punishment was a constant, dizzying reminder of his own folly, a fiery sermon on the consequences of repaying divine compassion with mortal sin. And as he spun, he was said to cry out a single, repeating phrase, a warning to all who might hear it across the ages. You should show gratitude to your benefactor. Our final journey into the punishments of Tartarus does not concern a single king or a defiant artist. It is the story of a group of 50 sisters bound together by a single, terrible command. They were the daughters of Danos, the king of Libya, and they were known throughout the lands as the Danaides. Their story is a tragedy of politics, power, and a crime committed not out of passion, but out of fear and obedience. Danaus had a twin brother, Aegyptus, who ruled the neighboring kingdom of Egypt. Aegyptus had 50 sons, and he saw a perfect opportunity to unite their kingdoms and consolidate his own power. He demanded that his 50 sons marry the 50 daughters of Danaus. But Danaus was wary. He feared that this was not an alliance, but a plot to murder him and seize his throne. And so he fled. He built a great ship, the first of its kind, and set sail across the sea with all 50 of his daughters, seeking refuge in his ancestral homeland of Argos. But the sons of Aegyptus were relentless. They pursued the Danaides to Argos, their ships filling the horizon. They laid siege to the city, demanding the wedding take place under the threat of war. The people of Argos, fearing destruction, pressured Danaus to accept the union. And so, a great wedding was arranged, 50 brides for 50 grooms. A feast was held, but beneath the music and the celebration, a dark plan was taking shape. Danos, still convinced that his new sons-in-law planned to kill him, decided to strike first. He summoned his daughters in secret on the eve of their wedding day, and he gave each one of them a dagger, sharp and slender, easy to conceal in the folds of their wedding gowns. His command was simple and monstrous when their new husbands were asleep in their beds. They were to kill them. It was a test of loyalty, not to their vows, but to their father. The wedding night arrived. The city celebrated, unaware of the grim plot. The 50 couples retired to their chambers. And in the dark, quiet hours before the dawn, a coordinated, silent slaughter took place. 49 of the daughters, bound by fear and filial duty, did as their father commanded. They plunged their daggers into the hearts of their sleeping husbands, staining their wedding beds with blood. By morning, 49 of the sons of Aegyptus were dead, but one daughter had refused. Her name was Hypermnestra. Her husband, Lynceus, had been kind to her. He had listened to her fears and had honored her wish to remain a virgin on their wedding night. He had shown her respect and gentleness, not the arrogance of a conqueror. And for this small act of kindness, she chose to defy her father. She spared Lynceus's life, waking him and helping him to escape the palace unharmed. She chose mercy over obedience, a single act of light in a night of profound darkness. In time, the 49 murderous sisters met their own ends. And when their souls were judged in the underworld, their crime was deemed a profound violation. It was not just murder. It was a betrayal of the sacred marriage vow, an act of treachery committed under the guise of love and union. The gods decided their punishment must fit the crime. It had to be a collective task, a shared penance for their shared sin. And it had to be, like so many punishments in Tartarus, eternal and utterly futile. They were brought to a dim, gray meadow. In the center stood a massive jar, a pithos. But it was no ordinary vessel. It was bottomless, or riddled with cracks and holes, a container that could never be filled. Their task was this for all of eternity. They were to carry water from a nearby murky stream and pour it into the jar. They were given sieves, or jars that were just as leaky, to complete their work. And so began their endless labor. Imagine the scene. 49 figures, their spectral forms moving in a slow, silent procession. They walk to the stream, their movements synchronized by millennia of repetition. They dip their useless vessels into the water, the liquid immediately beginning to trickle through their fingers and through the cracks in the jars. They walk back to the great Pythos. What little water remains spilling with every step. They lift their jars and pour the last few drops into the vessel, only to watch it disappear instantly into the darkness. And then, without a word, without a sigh, they turn and walk back to the stream to begin again. There is no progress. There is no hope of completion. Their work is a quiet, rhythmic portrait of pointlessness. The only sound is the soft splash of water and the ghostly rustle of their movements. Theirs is not a torment of fire or physical pain, but of a shared, monotonous, and soul-crushing despair. They who had spilled the life of their husbands on a single night are now condemned to spill water for all time, their efforts as empty as the jar they can never, ever fill. They are a chorus of futility, a quiet testament to a crime committed in unison, and a punishment endured together forever. We have spent some time now in the company of the deliberately defiant. We have met kings and artists, mothers and murderers, those who schemed against the gods and actively chose to violate their most sacred laws. Their punishments, while horrific, held a certain kind of logic. Their fates, however cruel, were a direct response to their choices. They played a game with Olympus, and they lost. But the justice of the gods is not always so straightforward. Their pride is a fragile thing, their domains fiercely guarded. Sometimes it was not a grand crime or a malicious plot that invited their wrath. Sometimes all it took was an accident, a wrong turn in the woods, an unlucky glance, a presence in a sacred space at the wrong moment. These are perhaps the most chilling stories of all. For the victims are not villains. They are the unfortunate, the unwitting, the ones who stumbled across a divine line they did not even know was there. Their punishments were not designed to chastise a sinner, but to erase a witness, to make an example of an innocent who had seen too much. Their transformations were not just a sentence, but a silencing. So take a deep breath, and let us now turn to those who suffered not for what they did, but simply for what they saw. We begin with a young hunter who, in the heat of the chase, took a wrong path and stumbled into a quiet grove where he was not welcome. In the hills and forests surrounding the city of Thebes, there lived a young man named Actaeon. He was a hunter, and a magnificent one. He had learned his craft from the wise centaur Chiron, the same tutor who taught heroes like Achilles and Jason. Actaeon was not a man of arrogance or impiety. His heart was devoted to the wild places of the world. He loved the chase, the scent of pine in the air, and the company of his hounds. He had a pack of 50 dogs, each one raised by him, loyal to his every command. He was, by all accounts, a good man, living a life of skill and purpose. One day, after a long and successful morning hunt, The sun was high and hot in the sky. Actaeon, weary from the chase, decided to lead his hounds to a familiar stream to drink. But on his way, he felt an urge to explore a part of the forest he had never seen before, a dense, ancient grove that promised cool shade and quiet. He was not seeking adventure or glory. He was simply a tired man, drawn deeper into the woods by the peaceful silence and the dappled light filtering through the canopy of leaves. He wandered without a clear path, enjoying the solitude, the world slowing down around him. He eventually came upon a place of breathtaking, secret beauty. It was a grotto, shaded by cypress and pine trees, with a crystal-clear spring bubbling from the rock and forming a still, cool pool. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and wildflowers. It felt like a sacred place, untouched by mortal hands, and this hidden grove was the secret bathing spot of Artemis, the virgin goddess of the hunt, the moon, and the wild. And at that very moment, she was there. Having grown tired from her own hunt, she had laid aside her silver bow and her quiver of arrows. Her attendants, a group of loyal nymphs, were helping her undress. Her divine form, usually cloaked in a hunter's tunic, was unclothed, vulnerable, and radiant as the moon itself. It was at this exact moment that Actaeon, parting a curtain of leaves, stepped into the clearing. His eyes, accustomed to scanning the forest for prey, fell upon the goddess. He froze. He was not filled with lust or profane thoughts. He was simply stunned, paralyzed by the sight of a beauty so divine it seemed to stop the very air in his lungs. He had stumbled, by pure chance, upon a sight no mortal man was ever meant to see. The nymphs, seeing him, shrieked in alarm. They rushed to surround their goddess, trying to shield her body from the mortal's gaze. But it was too late. The violation had occurred. Artemis turned, her face flushing not with embarrassment, but with a sudden, glacial rage. Her privacy, her sacred vow of chastity, her very essence as an untouchable deity had been compromised by the eyes of a man. She did not see an unlucky wanderer. She saw a trespasser. In her mind, his gaze was a stain upon her purity. She reached for her bow, but it was out of reach. It did not matter. Her fury was its own weapon. She scooped a handful of water from the spring, the cool drops shimmering with her anger, and flung it into Actaeon's face. As the water struck him, she spoke, her voice low and laced with a cold fire. "Now," she said, "you can go and boast that you have seen Artemis naked. If you can speak at all." A terrible transformation began instantly. As the divine water touched his skin, he felt his body twist and change. Antlers, heavy and branched, began to sprout from his forehead. His neck elongated, his ears grew pointed and pricked up at every sound. His skin thickened and coarsened into a rough, brown hide. His arms and legs warped, his hands and feet hardening into the cloven hooves of a stag. He tried to cry out, to beg for mercy, but the only sound that escaped his throat was the terrified, guttural bleat of a deer. Horrified, he caught his own reflection in the still water of the pool and saw the beast he had become. Panic seized him. He turned and fled, crashing through the undergrowth, his new form clumsy and strange to him. He was a hunter who now knew the fear of the hunted. But the true horror of his punishment was yet to come. His own pack of 50 hounds, resting nearby, caught the scent of the fleeing stag. Their instincts ignited. They did not recognize the scent of their master, only the scent of prey. With a great chorus of barking and baying, they gave chase. Actaeon ran for his life, his heart pounding with the terror he had inflicted on so many other creatures. He knew every path, every ravine in this forest, but his own loyal dogs, faster and more relentless than he had ever trained them to be, were closing in. They cornered him in a small clearing. He turned, his antlered head raised, his eyes wide with a plea they could not understand. He tried to call out their names, Melampus, Ichnobates, Pamphagus, but he had no voice. To them, he was not their master, their companion, the one who fed them and cared for them. He was just a stag brought to bay. They leaped upon him, their teeth tearing at his flesh, their familiar forms now a nightmare of violence. And there, in the quiet grove, the hunter Actaeon was torn to pieces by the very creatures he had loved most, his life ending not by the hand of a goddess, but by the unwitting loyalty of his own devoted hounds. His punishment was a perfect, terrible irony, to be utterly destroyed by that which had once been his greatest pride. Long before her name was a whisper of fear, long before her face was a weapon, Medusa was a mortal girl. And she was beautiful. It was not a loud or demanding beauty, but a quiet, profound grace that existed like sunlight on stone, effortless and unsettling in its perfection. Her hair shimmered like midnight silk, and her eyes held the deep, calm stillness of the ocean before a storm. She was born to a family of ancient monsters, her sisters, Stheno and Euryale, immortal and fearsome by design. But Medusa was different. She alone was mortal. She alone could know sorrow, and she alone could die. She wanted no part of the world of monsters or the fleeting admiration of men. She chose a path of quiet devotion. As a young woman, she dedicated her life to the service of Athena, the virgin goddess of wisdom and restraint. In the goddess's great marble temple, perched on high cliffs overlooking the sea, Medusa became a priestess. She swept the polished floors, lit the sacred incense, and offered prayers in the quiet hours before dawn. She willingly took the vow of chastity, not because she was forced, but because she truly believed in the ideal. Her goddess represented a strength that was above the chaos of mortal desire. Her devotion was as pure as her beauty. Worshippers who came to the temple would find themselves stealing glances at her, her serene face becoming a living symbol of the goddess she served. But beauty, even when hidden away in a sacred temple, does not go unnoticed. Word of the graceful priestess of Athens spread beyond the temple walls, carried on the wind and sailors' tongues, until it reached the ears of the gods themselves. And one god in particular took notice, not a god of wisdom, but a god of storms, of untamed appetites, of the vast and hungry sea. Poseidon. He ruled the depths with a restless pride, and he became obsessed with Medusa's untouchable grace. The fact that she belonged to no one, that she had willingly chosen a life of purity, was not a deterrent to him. It was a challenge. One evening, as the tide was high and the temple was empty, Poseidon rose from the sea. Gods do not need to ask for permission. He entered Athena's sacred space, his footsteps leaving a trail of seawater on the cold marble floor. Medusa, alone and preparing for her evening rites, turned to find the sea god looming over her in the shadows. She cried out for the goddess she had served so faithfully, but her pleas echoed unanswered in the cavernous hall. And there, on the floor of the holy sanctuary, beneath the unblinking stone eyes of the statue of Athena, Poseidon committed his violation. It was not love. It was not seduction. It was a brutal act of divine power, a desecration of all that was sacred. When it was over, he vanished as quickly as he had come, leaving behind only the scent of salt and a profound, shattered silence. Medusa lay broken on the floor, curled beneath the image of her goddess, waiting for justice, for comfort, for any sign of divine compassion. But when Athena finally appeared, her eyes held no pity. They held only fury. Her temple, her space of reason and purity, had been defiled. But her rage was not directed at her fellow Olympian, the powerful god who had committed the crime. It was directed at the mortal victim who lay weeping at her feet. In the cold logic of a god, power protects power. Athena blamed Medusa. Perhaps she believed the girl's beauty had invited the attack. Or perhaps it was simply more convenient to punish the powerless priestess than to confront the god of the sea. The purity of the temple had been broken, and someone had to pay the price. "You have brought shame into my house," Athena's voice echoed, cold as stone. "Let the world see what becomes of beauty that invites such destruction." She reached down, and as her divine hand touched Medusa's forehead, the punishment began. It was not a swift death. It was a transformation, a curse designed for eternal isolation. Medusa's beautiful hair, the locks that had been praised in whispers, began to writhe and twist, thickening into a mass of living, hissing serpents. Her skin lost its warmth, taking on a deathly pallor. But the cruelest change was in her eyes. Her soft gaze, once filled with sorrow, hardened into a weapon. From that moment on, any living creature that looked directly into her eyes would be instantly turned to stone. It was a curse disguised as a defense. She could no longer be looked upon, but in turn, she could never look upon another without destroying them. She cried out, but her voice was no longer human. Athena watched, unmoved, as her most devout priestess was remade into a monster. Then the goddess returned to her throne on Olympus, her sense of order restored, banished and broken. Medusa fled into exile. She wandered into the wilderness, to a bleak, windswept island at the edge of the world, a place where no one would find her. Her new life was one of utter solitude. Every accidental glance was a tragedy, a bird frozen mid-flight, a deer turned to a lifeless statue in the brush. The girl who had once swept temple floors now walked a path paved with her own accidental destruction. The cave she finally called home was already a gallery of statues, the remains of forgotten wanderers or warriors who had met her gaze and become part of the landscape. The girl who had prayed to Athena was gone, having died on the temple floor. In her place was something else, a woman whose soul had been reshaped by betrayal. Her humanity began to fade, not from malice, but from an isolation so complete it was like a living death. And meanwhile, the world began to retell her story. Her name was passed from mouth to mouth, but the truth was stripped away. The parts about Poseidon and Athena's unjust wrath were conveniently forgotten, edited out by poets who preferred their gods to be flawless. She was no longer Medusa the victim. She became Medusa the Gorgon, a terrifying monster with serpent hair and a gaze that killed. She was a cautionary tale told to frighten children, her face carved onto shields as a symbol of fear. The very gods who had created her monstrosity now used her image as a weapon. She had simply survived, and to those in power, survival is often the most threatening act of all. Hidden in her lonely cave, she was unaware that she had become one of the most famous monsters in the world. Her true story buried forever beneath the myth. Our final story does not take place in the dark pits of Tartarus, nor in the quiet groves of the mortal world. It takes place at the westernmost edge of the earth, where the sky touches the land in a place of permanent twilight. And our subject is not a mortal who overstepped his bounds. He is a god of the old order, a warrior who fought a great war and lost. His name is Atlas, and his punishment is not one of fire or futility, but of an immense, eternal, and soul-crushing weight. Atlas was a Titan, one of the sons of Iapetus and brother to Prometheus. But, unlike his forward-thinking brother who sided with the new gods, Atlas was a loyal and powerful leader of the old regime. During the Titanomachy, the 10-year war that decided the fate of the cosmos, Atlas was one of the chief generals of the Titans. He led their forces against Zeus and the upstart Olympians with strength and ferocity. He fought for the old world order, for the reign of his kin. But the old world fell. The Olympians, with their strategic cunning and the thunderbolts of Zeus, were victorious. The defeated Titans were rounded up. Most, including their king, Cronus, were cast down into the eternal darkness of Tartarus, imprisoned for all time. But for Atlas, their strongest general, Zeus devised a special punishment. It would not be a sentence of imprisonment in the dark, but one of public service and visible humiliation. He would not be hidden away. He would be put on display, made a permanent feature of the world he had fought to rule. Zeus condemned Atlas to stand forever at the western edge of the world, at the point where the dome of the heavens meets the earth. And his task, for all of eternity, was to hold up the sky. He was to bear the entire weight of the celestial sphere upon his massive shoulders, to prevent it from collapsing back down onto the earth. Imagine the burden. It is not the sharp, recurring agony of Prometheus's eagle, nor the psychological torment of Sisyphus's boulder. It is a pain that is constant, dull, and immeasurably heavy. It is the feeling of muscles strained beyond all endurance, a weariness so profound it sinks into the very marrow of his bones. But it is a weariness from which he can never rest. He cannot shrug. He cannot shift his weight. He cannot sleep. He is a living pillar, a divine prisoner forced to uphold the very heavens now ruled by his victorious enemies. His is a unique punishment, for his labor is not meaningless. It is essential. If he were to falter, the stars would fall from their courses, and the sky itself would crash down, bringing ruin to the world. And so, his sentence is not just to suffer, but to serve. He is an integral part of the new cosmic order, his eternal torment a necessary component for its stability. He is a living monument to the defeat of the Titans, a constant, silent reminder of the price of warring against Zeus. For countless ages he stood there, his only company the setting sun and the rising stars. The world moved on, but he remained fixed, a figure of immense strength and profound sorrow. In all of Greek mythology, he interacts with mortals only twice, and both times these encounters only serve to highlight the tragedy of his fate. The first was with the hero Perseus, who, returning from his quest to slay Medusa, passed through Atlas's domain. Atlas, who had been warned by a prophecy that a son of Zeus would one day come to steal the golden apples from the nearby garden of his daughters, the Hesperides, was wary. He refused Perseus' hospitality. The hero, angered by the Titan's gruffness, retaliated. He unveiled the severed head of Medusa. Atlas, who had faced down armies of gods, was powerless against her gaze. He was instantly transformed into a chain of mountains, his massive form becoming the stones and earth that now bear his name, the Atlas Mountains. And from that day on, it was said that this great mountain range was what held the heavens aloft. Centuries later, another son of Zeus arrived, the great hero Heracles, performing his 12 labors. One of his tasks was to retrieve those same golden apples, knowing he could not take them himself. Heracles made a proposal to the Titan. He offered to take the sky onto his own shoulders to give Atlas a few precious moments of rest. If Atlas would fetch the apples for him, Atlas, who had not known a second of relief for eons, wept with gratitude. The opportunity was too great to refuse. Heracles braced himself, and the Titan carefully transferred the crushing weight of the heavens. For the first time in ages, Atlas was free. He stretched his aching muscles and, feeling light and unburdened, quickly retrieved the apples. But, as he held them, a tempting thought entered his mind. He could deliver the apples himself. He could leave Heracles here, trapped under the sky forever, and wander the world, free. He returned and told Heracles of his new plan. But Heracles was just as cunning as he was strong. He pretended to agree. "An excellent idea," he said. "But could you just take the sky back for one moment? The weight is not settled properly on my shoulders. I need to adjust my cloak to make a better cushion." The foolish, unsuspecting Titan, eager to be on his way, agreed. He set the apples down, and once again took the weight of the heavens upon his shoulders. Heracles quickly picked up the apples, thanked the Titan for his help, and walked away. The brief moment of freedom was over. Atlas had been tricked, and his eternal burden was his once more, and so he remains, a lone, colossal figure at the edge of the world, his face weathered by eternal winds, his body strained by an eternal weight. He's not evil, not a schemer, not a monster. He is simply a soldier who fought for the losing side, a king whose kingdom turned to dust, and his punishment is to stand forever in silence, carrying a weight so immense that the world has forgotten he is a prisoner and sees him only as a part of the landscape, a quiet, sorrowful mountain holding up the stars. From the lonely peak where Atlas bears his burden, let us now descend once more into the shadowy depths of Tartarus. Here, the air is still and heavy, and the punishments are not always of futility or frustration, but of raw, physical, and eternal violation. Our gaze falls upon a figure of immense size, a giant so vast that his body is said to cover 9 acres of the underworld's dusty floor. He does not push a stone or reach for fruit. He simply lies there, pinned to the ground, his great limbs staked down, unable to move. This is Tityos, a son of the earth goddess Gaia, and his crime was one of brutal, impulsive desire. directed at a goddess who was under the special protection of Zeus. Tityos was a creature of immense power and primal instinct. His story begins with an act of divine jealousy. The ever-scheming goddess Hera, wishing to punish her rival, Leto, the mother of Apollo and Artemis, decided to use the giant as her weapon. As Leto was traveling to the sacred site of Delphi, Hera whispered in Tityos' ear, filling his mind with an irresistible lust for the Titaness. The giant, his passions inflamed by Hera's divine influence, waylaid Leto and attempted to assault her. But Leto was not without protectors. Her cries for help were heard by her two powerful children. In an instant, Apollo and Artemis were there, their faces set with a cold, protective fury. They were gods of light and the hunt, and they would not suffer their mother to be harmed. Their silver arrows flew, swift and silent, piercing the giant's massive form. Tityos fell, his body crashing to the earth with the sound of a landslide. But his death was merely the beginning of his punishment. For the crime of attempting to violate the mother of two great Olympians, Zeus condemned him to a torment that mirrored the eternal agony of Prometheus. Tityos was stretched out upon the ground in Tartarus, his arms and legs bound by inescapable chains. And there, for all of eternity, two great vultures descend upon him each day. They are creatures of the underworld, dark and patient. They land upon his chest, their claws gripping his flesh, and they begin to feast. But they do not attack his eyes or his limbs. They plunge their beaks deep into his abdomen and consume his liver. Like Prometheus, Tityos is immortal, and his liver regenerates with every passing lunar cycle, ensuring that the vulture's food source is never depleted. His punishment is an endless cycle of violation. His body, which he sought to use as an instrument of assault, is now eternally assaulted. He lies helpless, a passive feast for the creatures of the underworld, his torment a public spectacle of divine retribution. Unlike Prometheus, who suffers for an act of compassion, Tityos suffers for an act of pure lust. He is not a defiant martyr, but a monument to the consequences of touching what the gods have declared sacred. He is a silent, sprawling landscape of pain, a permanent warning that those who prey upon the gods will, in turn, become eternal prey themselves. He lies still, his only movement the slow, rhythmic tearing of his flesh, a sound that is absorbed by the profound silence of the underworld. Not all who angered the gods were great warriors or artists of supernatural skill. Some were simply kings whose pride festered into a madness so profound that they saw their own reflection and mistook it for a god. Such was the case of Salmoneus, a king of Elis, a man whose desire was not just to be respected by the gods, but to become one. Salmoneus was a man who looked at the sky, heard the mighty roar of thunder, and saw not the power of Zeus, but a performance he could imitate. His arrogance was not born of a specific talent, but of a deep, blasphemous narcissism. He grew tired of being a mere mortal king, and so he decreed that his subjects should no longer worship the Olympians. Instead, they were to worship him. He did not ask them to call him a living god or a divine descendant. He commanded them to call him Zeus. To legitimize this absurd claim, he staged an elaborate, theatrical mockery of divine power. He ordered a great bridge to be constructed from bronze, its surface polished until it gleamed. He would then harness 4 horses to his chariot and drive them at a gallop across the bridge. the pounding of the hooves and the rattling of the metal wheels creating a deafening clatter that was meant to replicate the sound of Zeus's thunder. As he rode, he would have his soldiers, or he himself, throw flaming torches into the crowds below or up into the air, a cheap imitation of the lightning that fell from the heavens. It was a breathtakingly audacious act of impiety. He was not just claiming to be a god. He was performing it, reducing the awesome, terrifying power of the storm to a crude piece of theater. He demanded sacrifices in his name and punished any who refused to honor him as the true Lord of the sky. He was playing with the most sacred symbols of Olympian authority, not in a subtle test of wits like Sisyphus, but in an open, public, and ridiculous charade. From his real throne on Olympus, Zeus watched this performance. We can imagine he was not enraged at first, perhaps even morbidly fascinated by the sheer gall of the mortal king. But the charade continued, and Salmoneus's arrogance grew. He truly believed his own act. He saw the fear of his people as worship, and the sound of his bronze bridge as proof of his divinity. He had forgotten that a real god was listening, and that the difference between a flaming torch and a true thunderbolt was the difference between a spark and the utter annihilation of the cosmos. Finally, Zeus had seen enough. There would be no warning, no test, no opportunity for redemption. The crime was too direct, the mockery too profound. With a single, effortless motion, Zeus plucked a thunderbolt from his arsenal. It was not a grand theatrical gesture. It was a simple, decisive act of correction. He hurled it from the heavens. A streak of pure, white-hot energy tore through the sky. It struck Salmoneus in his chariot, in the midst of his pathetic performance. The true thunderbolt made no sound like rattling bronze. It was a deafening roar that ripped the air apart. The true lightning was not a flickering torch. It was a fire that consumed everything it touched. The king, his horses, his chariot, and the entire city that had enabled his madness were vaporized in an instant. All that remained was a cloud of smoke and the lingering smell of ozone. Zeus had not just killed him, he had erased him, using the very power Salmoneus had tried so feebly to imitate. The king's soul was sent down to Tartarus, to suffer for his blasphemy in the eternal gloom. His story became a simple and stark lesson, stripped of all poetry or psychological complexity. It was a warning whispered across Greece: do not pretend to be a god. Do not mock their power or try to steal their name. For the gods are always watching, and their reality is infinitely more terrible and powerful than any mortal imitation. In the ancient city of Orchomenus in Boeotia, there lived a king named Minyas who had 3 daughters. Their names were Leucippe, Arcippe, and Alcatho, and they were known throughout the kingdom as models of domestic virtue. They were not queens or warriors, but quiet, industrious women, devoted to their home and their craft. Their days were spent in the soft, rhythmic clatter of the loom, their fingers expertly weaving intricate patterns into cloth. They were pious women, but their worship was reserved for the gods of order and reason, for Hera, the queen of heaven, and especially for Athena, the patroness of their beloved craft. They valued hard work, sobriety, and the quiet dignity of a well-kept home. One day, a new kind of festival was declared in the city. It was the celebration of Dionysus, the god of wine, ecstasy, and wild abandon. A priest announced that all the women of Orchomenus were to leave their looms, abandon their chores, and go out to the mountains to honor the god with dancing, singing, and ecstatic rites. And so they did. The streets emptied of women. Their voices carried on the wind as they joined the growing throng of worshippers, their hearts open to the god's chaotic joy. All, that is, except the three daughters of Minyas. From their window, they watched the other women go, and they scoffed. They saw the Dionysian rites not as sacred, but as frivolous, indulgent, and unseemly. Why would they abandon their important work to frolic in the mountains like wild animals? Their duty, they believed, was here, in their home, with their loom. Let the other women play, they said to each other. We will serve our goddess, Athena, with our craft. And so they stayed, defiantly working their threads, telling stories to one another to pass the time as the sounds of the festival grew more distant. But Dionysus is not a god who tolerates being ignored. His domain is release, the breaking of boundaries, and he demands to be acknowledged. He did not strike the sisters down immediately. First, he sent them warnings, a series of strange and beautiful portents meant to coax them from their stubborn piety. Suddenly, the looms they were working on began to change. The plain threads of wool started to transform, without their touch, into blooming vines of ivy and grape clusters. The scent of wine and honey began to fill the room, seeming to drip from the ceiling itself. The soft light from their oil lamps began to flicker and dance with an unnatural, divine fire, and the air grew thick with the scent of myrrh and frankincense, as if an unseen priest were making offerings all around them. Then they heard it, the phantom roar of great beasts, lions, bulls, and panthers echoing through their quiet halls. Their orderly, domestic sanctuary was being invaded by the wild, untamed magic of the god they had rejected. Still, the sisters held fast. They convinced themselves it was all a trick of the senses, a shared illusion. They clung to their reason and continued to work, their knuckles white as they gripped their shuttles. Their refusal was a final insult to the god. And so, Dionysus let the madness they had resisted consume them entirely. A sudden, violent frenzy seized their minds. They were filled with an insatiable, bloodthirsty desire to join the rites in the mountains. But their sanity had been twisted into something horrific. In their divine madness, they came to believe that they must make a sacrifice to the god, a human sacrifice. They gathered in a circle and cast lots to decide which of them would offer up their own child. The lot fell to Leucippe. Without hesitation, the three sisters, their eyes wild with a fire that was not their own, rushed to find her young son, Hippasus. They fell upon the terrified boy like a pack of wolves, and in a gruesome enactment of the holiest Dionysian rite, the sparagmos, they tore him limb from limb. With their hands and faces stained with blood, they finally ran from their home, screaming with a joy that was not their own, and joined the true worshippers on the mountainside, their terrible sacrifice complete. But as the rites concluded and the sun began to set, the gods' madness slowly receded, leaving them with the cold, unbearable horror of what they had done. They could never return to their home, to the life of quiet order they had once cherished. Their punishment was to be forever cast out from it. As they wandered in the twilight, their forms began to change. Their bodies shrank, their skin became leathery, and their arms sprouted thin, membranous wings. Dionysus or some say Hermes, acting on his behalf, transformed them into bats and owls, creatures of the night. They who had stubbornly clung to their work indoors, shunning the wild festival, were now cursed to be creatures of the dark, forever fleeing the light of the sun, their only song a mournful, nocturnal cry. Let us now travel to the rugged, mountainous heart of Greece, to the ancient land of Arcadia. Here ruled a king named Lycaon. To the outside world, he was a founder of civilizations, a man who had established a city on a hilltop and had even begun a formal cult to worship Zeus Lycaeus. On the surface, he was a pillar of piety and progress. But Zeus, from his high throne, heard whispers of a different story. He heard that the land of Arcadia was a godless place, that the sacred laws of hospitality were scorned, and that King Lycaon himself presided over a kingdom of profound cruelty. Deciding to see the truth for himself, Zeus cloaked his divinity and descended to earth in the guise of a poor, weary traveler. He walked the roads of Arcadia, and as he went, he gave subtle signs of his divine nature. The common folk, seeing these portents, recognized him and began to fall to their knees in prayer and worship. But when Zeus arrived at the palace of Lycaon, the king was not so easily convinced. He scoffed at his people's piety and mocked the humble traveler who stood before him. In his heart, he decided to devise a test to discover, once and for all, if this guest was truly a god. His test was born of the same horrific curiosity that had condemned Tantalus. That evening, Lycaon hosted a great feast in the traveler's honor. But behind the scenes, he had committed an unspeakable act. He had taken a hostage from a rival tribe, a man under his protection, murdered him, and then had his cooks prepare the flesh. Some parts were roasted, others were boiled, and the ghastly meal was served to his divine guest. Lycaon watched, his eyes gleaming with a scientific cruelty, waiting to see if his guest would notice. It was the ultimate test of omniscience, and the ultimate violation of Xenia, the sacred law of guest and host. Zeus, of course, knew immediately. The instant the food was placed before him, he saw the truth of the abomination. A divine rage, more powerful and immediate than any he had unleashed before, consumed him. This was not just an insult. It was a confirmation that humanity, under kings like Lycaon, had become irredeemably corrupt. He rose from the table, his disguise falling away to reveal the true, terrible majesty of the King of the gods. His judgment was instantaneous. He struck the table with a bolt of lightning, and the entire palace erupted in flames. The courtiers and guards who had been complicit in the crime screamed as the fire consumed them. Lycaon himself, terrified beyond all measure, fled the burning hall. He ran from the palace, from the city, out into the dark, silent countryside, desperate to escape the god's wrath. But there was no escape from a punishment that was already unfolding within him. As he ran, a primal change began to take hold. He tried to scream, but the sound that came from his throat was a guttural howl. He looked down at his hands and saw them covered in coarse, gray fur, his nails thickening into claws. His clothes were ripping and fusing with his skin, becoming a bristly hide. His body contorted, his spine lengthening, his face stretching into a long, lupin snout. He fell to all fours, his human form melting away, replaced by the lean, hungry shape of a great wolf. He had become the first werewolf. His mind, cruelly, remained intact. He was still Lycaon, the king, the father, the man. But his consciousness was now trapped inside the body of a beast, driven by an insatiable hunger for flesh, the very thing he had so monstrously served to his guest. His punishment was to become the literal embodiment of his own savagery. He who had treated a man like an animal was now cursed to live as one forever. His howls, echoing through the Arcadian wilderness, a cry of eternal hunger and the grief of a man trapped within a monster. His sin was so profound that it did not just earn him a personal punishment. It is said that this was the final act that convinced Zeus to wipe the slate clean, to wash the world of its wickedness with a great cleansing flood. Let us now turn to a story of ambition so vast and so juvenile. It sought to physically rearrange the heavens. This is the tale of the twin giants, Otis and Ephialtes, known together as the Aloidae. They were sons of Poseidon, the sea god, and from the moment of their birth, they were creatures of immense and terrifying power. They grew at a supernatural rate. Every year their height increased by a cubit, and their breadth by a fathom. By the time they were 9 years old, they stood as tall as mountains, their strength so great that they felt invincible. And with this immense power came an equally immense arrogance. They looked at the world, at mortals, and even at the gods, not with reverence, but with the dismissive confidence of children who have never been told no. Before they even turned their eyes to Olympus, they committed an act of unbelievable audacity. For reasons lost to myth, perhaps a simple desire to prove their strength, they captured Ares, the god of war. They bound the fearsome Olympian in chains and sealed him inside a large bronze jar, a pithos. And there he remained for 13 months. A strange, eerie peace fell over the world. Without the god of conflict to stir men's hearts, war ceased to exist. It was an unnatural silence, a testament to the giant's power to disrupt the very fabric of the Olympian order. Ares may have withered away in that jar had the twin stepmother not told Hermes what had happened. The clever messenger god snuck in and freed the weakened god of war. But the message had been sent. The Aloidae were a force to be reckoned with. Their ambition, however, was only just beginning. They looked up at the distant, cloud-wrapped peak of Mount Olympus and saw not a sacred throne room, but a fortress to be conquered. They announced their plan to the world. They would storm the home of the gods. To do this, they would physically build a staircase to the heavens. They would take Mount Ossa and place it upon Mount Olympus, and then take Mount Pelion and place it upon Ossa, creating a new, higher peak from which they could launch their assault. Their goals were not just conquest, but possession. Like so many mortals and giants before them, they desired the goddesses themselves. Otis declared he would take Artemis, the virgin huntress, for his bride. Ephialtes, even more audaciously, claimed he would have Hera, the queen of the gods. The Olympians were threatened. These were not mere mortals. They were the powerful sons of a god, and their plan, while arrogant, was not impossible. But a prophecy gave the gods an advantage. It was foretold that the Aloidae could not be killed by the hand of a god or a mortal, but only by each other. With this knowledge, the gods did not meet the giants with thunderbolts and armies, but with a clever, deadly stratagem. Artemis, the very goddess Otis sought to claim, took center stage in the plan. She allowed the giants to begin their work, to move the great mountains and prepare their assault from the island of Naxos. As the two brothers stood in a clearing, boasting of their imminent victory, Artemis transformed herself into a beautiful, pure white doe. She darted out from the trees and ran directly between the two giants. Instantly, their thoughts of war were forgotten, replaced by a competitive hunter's instinct. Each brother wanted to be the one to fell the magnificent creature. Standing on opposite sides of the doe's path, they raised their hunting spears at the same moment. They both threw with all their might, aiming for the heart of the deer. But in the fraction of a second before the spears could find their mark, Artemis vanished. The spears, flying true, missed their divine target entirely and flew across the clearing. And each spear found a new target at the heart of the other brother. Otis was struck by Ephialtes' spear, and Ephialtes by Otis's. They fell to the ground, slain by each other's hand, the prophecy perfectly, tragically fulfilled. But their punishment did not end with their death. For the crime of attempting to storm heaven itself, their souls were sent to the underworld. There, they were bound to a great pillar. But they were not bound side by side. They were tied back to back, so that for all of eternity they could never again look upon the face of their twin, the only being they had ever truly been close to. Their bond of brotherhood was twisted into a punishment of eternal separation, and to complete their torment, they were not left in silence. Perched on the pillar above them for all time is a Strix, a mythical screech owl, a bird of ill omen, and for all of eternity, the creature shrieks its piercing, mournful cry directly into their ears. Their punishment is one of sound and isolation, an endless, nerve-shredding noise, and the constant, inescapable presence of the brother they can never see. We now move from crimes of active defiance to a punishment born from a simple, quiet, and devastating mistake. Our story takes us to the prosperous kingdom of Calydon, ruled by a king named Oeneus. He was, by all accounts, a good king. His lands were fertile, his people were content, and he was known for producing some of the finest wine in all of Greece, a skill it was said he learned from the god Dionysus himself. Oeneus was a pious man, who understood that the favor of the gods was the foundation of his kingdom's prosperity. But even the most pious man can make a mistake. At the end of a particularly bountiful harvest, Oeneus prepared a great festival to give thanks to the gods. He offered the first fruits of the harvest, the grain, the olives, and the wine at the altars of the 12 great Olympians. He honored Zeus with a bull, Apollo with a ram, and made sure each of the celestial powers received their due for the blessings they had bestowed upon his land. It was a grand and respectful ceremony. But in the midst of the preparations, in the counting of the offerings and the listing of the gods, a single name was omitted. He made offerings to all the others, but he forgot Artemis. It may have been an honest mistake, a simple oversight in a long list of duties. But Artemis, the fierce, independent goddess of the hunt, the wilderness, and the moon, did not see it that way. From her divine vantage point, she saw the altars of her fellow gods smoking with sacrifices, while hers remained cold and empty. To be forgotten is perhaps the greatest insult one can pay a god. It implies they are insignificant, that their power is not worthy of acknowledgement. Her pride was deeply wounded, and her anger, like a slow-burning ember, began to glow. Her retribution would not be a thunderbolt from the sky, or a direct curse upon the king. As the goddess of wild things, her revenge would come from the untamed world she commanded. She would unleash a force of nature upon his kingdom, a creature of pure destruction that would make Oeneus remember her name forever. She sent the Caledonian boar. This was no ordinary animal. It was a monstrous beast of immense size and terrifying power. Its hide was as tough as baked leather, covered in bristles as sharp and stiff as spears. Its tusks were like curved swords. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent, fiery light, and its breath could scorch the crops in the fields. It was a living engine of destruction, embodying the untamed and vengeful spirit of the goddess who had sent it. The boar descended upon the fertile plains of Caledon, and the kingdom's prosperity turned to dust. It ripped through the prized vineyards, tearing up the vines that produced Oeneus's famous wine. It trampled the fields of golden grain, ensuring a future of famine. It gored the livestock in their pens and attacked any shepherd or farmer who was unfortunate enough to cross its path. The people fled to the safety of the city walls, their livelihoods destroyed, their land a ravaged wasteland. The kingdom of Oeneus, once a symbol of bounty, was now a place of terror and despair, all because its king had forgotten a single prayer. But the punishment did not end there, for the boar's presence created a new wave of human tragedy. To rid his land of this curse, Oeneus's son, the brave Prince Meleager, had to assemble the greatest heroes from all across Greece for what would become one of the most famous episodes in mythology, the Caledonian boar hunt. Heroes like Theseus, Jason, and the twin Castor and Pollux answered the call. And among them came a figure who would become central to the tragedy, Atalanta, the fierce virgin huntress and a devotee of Artemis herself. The hunt was fraught with conflict. Many of the male heroes bristled at the idea of hunting alongside a woman, their pride wounded. During the chase, the boar killed several of the heroes, its fury seemingly unstoppable. It was Atalanta who first drew the beast's blood with an arrow, and it was Meleager who finally dealt the killing blow with his spear. In honor of her bravery and her first strike, Meleager awarded the prized hide of the boar to Atalanta. This act, however, ignited a fatal dispute. Meleager's own uncles, furious that a woman should receive the trophy over them, tried to take the hide from her by force. In a fit of rage, defending Atalanta's honor, Meleager killed them both. The news of this reached Meleager's mother, Althea. Consumed by grief and rage at the death of her brothers at the hands of her own son, she enacted a terrible revenge, one that led to Meleager's own cursed death. The royal house of Caledon was left in ruins. And so, the simple mistake of King Oeneus spiraled outwards, unleashing a wave of destruction that not only ravaged his land, but also shattered his own family, leaving him a broken man on a broken throne, forever haunted by the goddess he forgot. This is not a story of hubris, but of a darkness that resides in the human heart. It begins, as many tragedies do, with a marriage. Procne, a princess of Athens, was given in marriage to Tereus, the king of Thrace, and a son of the war god Ares. Their union sealed an alliance between the two kingdoms, and for a time there was peace. They had a son, a boy named Idas, who was the image of his father. But after 5 years in the rugged foreign land of Thrace, Procne grew lonely. She missed her home, and most of all, she missed her younger sister, Philomela. She begged her husband to travel back to Athens and escort Philomela to Thrace for a visit. Tereus, seeing his wife's sadness, agreed. He sailed to Athens and was welcomed as a king and a brother. When he saw Philomela, she was no longer the child he remembered, but a young woman of breathtaking beauty. And in that moment, a savage, uncontrollable lust was kindled in the king's heart. He concealed his desire, delivering his wife's loving message and promising to guard her sister with his life on the journey back. The king of Athens entrusted his daughter to him, and they set sail. But Tereus had no intention of returning directly to his palace. He diverted their course, landing on a desolate coast and taking Philomela to a remote, fortified cabin hidden deep within the woods. There, surrounded by the silent forest, he revealed his true nature. He fell upon his sister-in-law and, ignoring her pleas and struggles, brutally raped her. When the horrific act was done, Philomela, though broken and weeping, was not silenced. Her eyes burned with a defiant fire. She threatened him, telling him that she would find a way to expose his crime. "I will tell my story to the world," she cried. "If I cannot, I will tell it to the trees and the rocks, and they will tell it for me." Tereus, realizing that his crime would not remain secret as long as she had a voice, was driven to a second act of profound cruelty. He drew a knife, and to ensure her eternal silence, he seized her and cut out her tongue. He then left her imprisoned in that lonely cabin, a mute and shattered victim, and returned to his wife. To Procne, he told a terrible lie. He wept false tears and told her that her beloved sister, Philomela, had died tragically on the journey. Procne was consumed by grief, mourning for a sister she believed was lost forever. Meanwhile, in her forest prison, Philomela, unable to speak, found another way to tell her story. She found a loom and, with threads of purple and white, she began to weave. She did not create images of gods or heroes. She wove a tapestry that was a detailed, graphic diary of her suffering the journey, the cabin in the woods, the face of Tereus twisted with lust, and the final, bloody act of her mutilation. When it was finished, she gave the tapestry to an old servant, motioning for her to take it to the queen. The tapestry was delivered to Procne. As she unrolled it, her confusion turned to dawning horror, and then to absolute, ice-cold certainty. She saw her husband's crime, her sister's suffering, woven in silent, undeniable testimony. Her grief for her sister's death transformed into a burning rage for her sister's life. She waited patiently for the annual festival of Dionysus, the one time of year when the women of Thrace were permitted to leave their homes and roam the mountains in ecstatic rites. Under the cover of the wild Bacchic frenzy, Procne, dressed as a worshipper, made her way to the forest prison. She broke down the door and found her sister, dressed in rags. Without a word, she led Philomela back to the palace. There, the two sisters plotted a revenge as monstrous as the crime that had inspired it. Procne looked at her son, Oedipus, and saw not her child, but the face of her treacherous husband. In a heart that had been emptied of all love and filled with hate, she saw her path. She took her son, her own flesh and blood, and killed him. Then, with a chilling deliberation, she prepared his body, cooked it, and served it as a meal to her husband, the king. That evening, Tereus feasted, commenting on how delicious the meal was. When he had finished, he called out, "Let my son Oedipus be brought to me." Procne stood before him, her voice devoid of all emotion. "The one you ask for," she said, "is already within you." As Tereus looked at her in confusion, Philomela emerged from the shadows and threw the severed, bloody head of his son onto the table. A scream of pure animal horror tore from the king's throat. He finally understood. He grabbed an axe and, in a blind rage, began to chase the two sisters through the palace halls. They fled, their hope exhausted, knowing he would kill them. As he closed in, his axe raised, they lifted their faces to the sky and prayed to the gods for deliverance, for an escape from this unbearable cycle of violence and sorrow. The gods, who had remained silent throughout the tragedy, finally took pity. As Tereus was about to strike, a strange lightness filled the three figures. Their bodies began to change, to sprout feathers, to be lifted from the ground. They were transformed into birds, escaping into the sky. But their new forms were not a true release. They were an eternal embodiment of their roles in the tragedy. Tereus, the violent predator, was changed into a hoopoe, a bird with a crown of feathers like a king's crest and a long, sharp beak like a sword, forever destined to chase his victims through the air. Procne, the grieving mother, became the nightingale, a bird whose song is considered the most beautiful and the most mournful in the world, forever singing a heartbreaking lament for her lost son, Adis. And Philomela, the victim whose voice had been stolen, became the swallow, a bird that has no song, but only chatters and cries, forever trying to tell her terrible story, but never able to form the words. They escaped death, but they were condemned to relive their sorrow for all time, their tragedy forever playing out in the skies. And so, you see, there's a common thread that weaves its way through so many of these fates. Isn't there a single, fatal flaw that echoes from the weaver's loom to the queen's court? Hubris. It's a word the ancient Greeks took very seriously. To them, it was not merely confidence or arrogance. It was the specific, dangerous act of a mortal forgetting their place. It was the moment a human looked at the divine order and saw themselves as an equal, or even a superior. It was the belief that your skill, your beauty, your cleverness, or your fortune was entirely your own creation, not a gift from the gods to be cherished with humility. To challenge a god was to challenge the very structure of the cosmos. It was like a single note in a grand symphony deciding to play louder than all the others, creating a dissonance that could not be ignored. The punishments, in that sense, were not just acts of anger. They were a form of cosmic correction. They were the gods, in their terrifying and absolute way, restoring the balance. The chains of Prometheus, the weaving of Arachne, the weeping stone of Niobe, these were not just warnings. They were boundary markers, permanent signposts on the map of existence that read, "Here, the mortal realm ends, and the divine begins. Do not cross." And yet, as we listen to these tales in the quiet of the night, another question begins to form. Was this truly justice? Or was it something far more personal? The justice of Olympus was not blind. In fact, it was keenly, sharply sighted, and it often seemed to reflect the vanities and insecurities of the judge. The punishments rarely feel proportional to the crime. A boast about weaving is met with an eternal curse that transforms a girl into a spider. A hunter's accidental glance is met with a gruesome death at the jaws of his own hounds. Think of Athena, the goddess of wisdom and reason. Her punishment of Arachne was not a measured response. It was a fit of rage after she could find no flaw in the girl's work, a fury born of being shown an unpleasant truth. Or Apollo, the god of light and harmony, who could not simply win a contest, but had to flay his rival alive, turning a celebration of art into an act of brutal butchery. The gods, for all their power, were deeply, recognizably human in their flaws. They were prone to jealousy, vanity, and wounded pride. Their punishments often feel less like the workings of a divine legal system and more like the elaborate, eternal revenge of beings who could not stand to be proven wrong or to have their authority questioned. It was justice, yes, but it was the justice of a king, not a courtroom absolute, final, and deeply, frighteningly personal. But there is another layer to these stories, one that we can feel as the world grows still around us. It is the strange, quiet beauty of the suffering itself. Look at the figures of the underworld. Tantalus, forever reaching. The Danaides, forever pouring. Sisyphus, forever pushing his stone. After 1,000 years, after 1,000,000, does the desperation fade? Does the struggle become a kind of rhythm, a silent meditation? There is a profound endurance in these figures. Prometheus, chained to his rock, defiant in his silence. Atlas, holding the weight of the world, his sorrow as vast and constant as the stars he supports. Their punishments have become a part of the landscape. They are no longer just prisoners. They are landmarks of the soul. Their suffering is not a scream, but a low, eternal hum beneath the noise of the world. In their endless, unchanging tasks, there is a strange sort of constancy, a predictability that is almost peaceful. They remind us that some burdens are simply meant to be carried, that some tasks are never finished, and perhaps, in that acceptance, there is a release that is its own form of sleep, a surrender to the weight, to the water, to the stone, and to the endless, quiet rhythm of eternity. And so, let us paint one final picture in our minds before we drift away. Let us look down into the great, silent expanse of the underworld, not as a place of fire and screams, as later ages would imagine it, but as the Greeks saw it, a vast, gray, and quiet kingdom of shadow and memory. The air does not move. Time has no meaning. See Tantalus standing still in the clear, dark water. He is no longer reaching. His thirst has become a part of him, a quiet ache that is as constant as the rock beneath his feet. He simply stands, his eyes fixed on the fruit he will never taste, a statue of want in a silent pool. Nearby, Sisyphus is walking slowly back down his hill. His shoulders are slumped, but not in defeat. It is the posture of acceptance. The great boulder rests at the bottom, waiting for him, as it always does. He does not rush. His journey down the hill is his only moment of rest, and he takes it with a kind of grim, quiet grace. Deeper in the gloom, the fiery wheel of Ixion turns, but here, in the vastness of Tartarus, it makes no sound. It is a silent vortex of light, a pinwheel of eternal consequence spinning in the dark. And in the meadows, the 49 Danaides continue their procession, their movements as slow and rhythmic as a tide, their task as endless and as quiet as the slow dripping of water on stone. There is no struggle here anymore. There is only the work, only the eternal, unchanging rhythm of their penance. A strange and profound peace hangs over it all, a peace born of an eternity of suffering, where all resistance has long since faded away. These punishments, you see, are no longer about the anger of the gods. That fire has long since cooled. The insults have faded. The pride has been restored. What is left is not the sentence, but the state of being. These figures have become a part of the geography of the cosmos, as fixed as mountains, as constant as rivers. They are no longer just cautionary tales. They are meditations on the nature of our own struggles. They are the embodiment of the limits of our world. They are the weight of a burden that cannot be set down, the agony of a desire that cannot be fulfilled, the despair of a task that can never be completed. They are the quiet dignity of enduring what cannot be changed. And by witnessing their eternal, silent struggle, we are reminded of the peace that comes from letting go. So sleep now. Let these ancient, quiet punishments be the rhythm that guides you into rest. There is nothing left to fight. There is nothing left to prove. Let your worries roll away from you like Sisyphus's stone finding its way to the bottom of the hill. You do not need to follow it. Let it go. Let the quiet of the underworld envelop you, a cool, gray blanket for your thoughts. The gods have passed their judgment. The sentences have been carried out for longer than mortals have had names. All that is left now is the silence. The fire on the wheel casts no heat. The water in the pool makes no sound. The rock is at rest. Let your own body be at rest. You are safe from the gazes of the gods tonight. They are not watching you. Their attention is fixed on those who have already been judged. So let the darkness be a comfort. Let the silence be a cradle. And let sleep take you now, gently, into a place where all burdens are lifted and all struggles cease. Sleep well,